So thank you very much for coming out to join our panel on veterans leading the way. And I think the main focus of the panel is for us to take a look at some of the ways that we're empowering veterans in the AAPI community to be able to navigate through the career after the military. And oftentimes it's not necessarily just the veterans themselves, but it's their family members as well. So we have an illustrious panel that I would like to have kind of start off and introduce themselves, and then I'll close on that first session by introducing myself as the moderator. So Jennifer, how about
So I'll go first. This is the BMS audience, so everybody already knows me, but my name is Jennifer Rasing, and I'm the People, Business, and Resource Group, the Pan-Asian Network Pan Lead for Bristol Myers Squibb. And I'm really, really happy to be here today. I have many veteran family members and friends, so this conversation is actually near and dear to my heart. So thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Palisoul. I'm a Navy veteran and also a spouse of a Navy veteran. It's wonderful to be here with all you and with these esteemed panelists and our moderator. I am an immigrant and have been involved in the veteran space for a few years and been fortunate enough to recently serve in the Biden administration at the Pentagon. And so love to share more insights with you and how we can help veterans transition. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Lourdes Tiglao. I'm also a veteran. I served about almost 12 years at the United States Air Force in critical care air transport, and now I'm serving at the Biden administration as the director for the Center for Women Veterans. I have spent quite a bit of time during my transition in the veteran space as well, prior to coming to this particular group, and have gone through different sectors through humanitarian work and then private sector and tech and then here. So I definitely have a little bit of a unique perspective going across these different sectors.
And I'm Sharon Dunbar, moderating again this great panel. I'm an Air Force veteran, also spouse to an Air Force veteran and mother to an Army veteran. So we have sort of canvassed the services. I started off in the Air Force, coming out of the Air Force Academy, and I joke I retired 27 years behind schedule. I retired in 32 years of service, the last assignment commanding the Air Force District of Washington, and have been with the aerospace and defense industry since then. So one of the things that I find most interesting is the backgrounds of individuals and how we grew up, where we grew up, and some of the key influences on our lives. So I'd like to just throw that out for you to talk about, just to give a little more insight into what drives you, what has made you who you are.
That's a great question. So, wow. Well, growing up, my grandfather and many of our family members were served and still have served today. And really, so I'm not a veteran, but I've been with Bristol Myers Squibb in industry for almost 20 years, started out as a scientist and kind of navigated my way through science, the clinical trial space, and now as the D&I Pan lead. And really what drives me is really the Asian, not just Asian, but all community voices, right? Ensuring that our voices are out there, that we have a seat at the table. And this is something that my grandfather and my dad and everyone in my family has always instilled in me, just to have that voice, to take up space and to continue to rise. And that's something that's also near and dear to my heart.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I am an immigrant. But before I immigrated to America, my uncle and my grandfather are refugees. They fled communist China and went to Cuba, starting a small business. And then when Fidel Castro and the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, they were, I would say, one of the few who were able to come to this country. And as refugees, they fulfilled the American dream, starting their own business, ensuring that their children had a good education, and was part of the New York Chinese-Cuban Benevolent Association. And so since they established roots here in the 1970s, I was fortunate enough to come along with my mom and my father to America in the 1990s. So as an immigrant, the American dream is really the definition of what we all hope to achieve. And here I was about 16 years of age, not old enough to enlist without my parents' permission, but I felt the need to serve because of, what we've seen in America and what we see overseas in the communist countries. And so I got my parents' permission to serve and enlisted in the Navy. 3 weeks into boot camp, 9/11 happened in my hometown of New York City. And that really strengthened my resolve to stay in the military and to serve. And my first deployment was to Yokosuka, Japan, and participated in Operation Enduring Freedom and spent 8 years in both active and reserve. And my husband's family goes back to World War II. So his family, his uncles, parents, grandparents, all have served. And it's also unique in a sense to see how Caucasian Americans, they wear that honor and badge, having served in the military. And Asian Americans, we just want that equal opportunity. And some of us have fulfilled some of that, some of those goals. But at the same time, it's also, what about the next generation and the generations after that? How do we continue promoting their opportunities and, more importantly, helping them feel like they're part of America's history?
I don't know how you top that one. But one thing that I did neglect to say earlier is that I also am an immigrant as well. Came from the Philippines, came here before I was even 11 years old. And when I came here, I didn't speak English. I understood it, but couldn't speak it. And so a lot of my perspective actually comes from not even being able to communicate the first time. And maybe I bucked the system a little bit from the Asian culture because you got permission. I did not. In fact, when I tried to tell my father that I was going to try to enlist, he automatically shut it down. So I just decided, as soon as I am able to get out of the house, I will go ahead and enlist. And mind you, he didn't talk to me for 2 weeks after that. However, fast forward, so my experience is a little bit different from Juan with regard to the way that I approached going to military service. My compulsion to serve was more born out of the feeling that, so I grew up in Indiana and feeling that there has to be more to life than just life in Indiana. Any Hoosiers out there? It's not a bad thing. It's just I grew up in a different country, so I want to see the world. And so when I got into the military, there were definitely a lot of some hurdles along the way. I wasn't tall enough. I had to get a waiver. When I tried to get my citizenship, I had to fight for that. When I went to the military, I wasn't a citizen yet. A lot of folks think that you're going to be an automatic citizen, and you're not. You don't automatically get that. And so I had to fight for that one. And so one of the reasons that I really cherish the role that I have at VA is because I want to be able to impart some of these little nuggets that folks in the community probably don't know happens or that needs to happen. And so when you think about ways to make it easier for API community, especially those who are not yet citizens, to be able to get all of the benefits and services, is to really look at where those gaps are falling and be mindful that not everyone gets a citizenship just because they served.
I'm also Filipino.
Yeah. Those are excellent points. One of the assignments that I had, I commanded Air Force basic training. And when you take a look at the individuals who come in to serve, particularly those who are awaiting their citizenship, they don't take anything for granted. And I'm very grateful that over the last really 15 years that the process has accelerated tremendously because they couldn't re-enlist after the first enlistment, typically 4 years. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we're caught in a do loop because it would take 4 years for the citizenship to come through. And now, thankfully, the military is on it's been this way for at least 10 years, probably 15, rapid clip for getting folks to be able to get their citizenship. So my story is similar but different. My mother immigrated to the United States in 1947. She was actually the first female from Korea to come to grad school, and came by boat by herself at 23, and met my dad, who is of German descent, also an immigrant, and we grew up in Illinois, close to Indiana, but the obligation for us was you had to serve. So my brother went to West Point. I ended up going to the Air Force Academy because I didn't want to go to West Point. But it was that sense of service that was so important. And I think it's great for all families, but notably immigrant families, and in particular AAPI, because military service in the AAPI community is not considered up there with being a lawyer, being a doctor. And hopefully that will change, because there is, I believe, inherent honor in serving your country, and the skills that you learn, the leadership lessons that you learn are so important, which then kind of leads us to the transition aspect. What is the support structure that we have for our veterans? We were talking a little bit earlier about some of the technology that just continues to improve, but certainly I think if you were going to ask veterans, how can we make it easier, A, to navigate the technology, but B, from industry and the commercial sector who is hiring, how can we make it easier for veterans writ large, but in particular the AAPI community, so parents can say, you know what, there's a great landing opportunity for you post your military service. Don't discount it. So we'll start with you.
Oh, I'm starting. So I'll say the transition starts before you actually separate. That's the first hard stop. Starts before you even separate from the military. Trying to prepare, I would say, I know that when I got out, I literally got my 1 week of throwing everything at you, and then you were done. And then I remember, I'll tell this little story. I remember being told that, I was in medicine, so I was thinking, I was already fairly familiar with that process. And so they tried to tell me that, oh, no, don't worry, your medical records will get there. I was a little skeptical, so I took paper copies of my medical records. And lo and behold, my records were not there when I finally started going through the VA system. And so I had to say, don't worry, I have my paper copies. You can make copies. I will stay here. I will not leave it. And I only say that because there's a trust and verify component of this. What people may tell you may be something that they heard from someone else, but not necessarily always the most accurate, which goes back to one of the points that you were saying, which is how do we prepare people? Well, one, information awareness that's accurate. There's a lot of myths that are sometimes going around, like you're automatically a citizen when you go into the military. You're not. That's one myth. And so one part is information awareness. The other part, I think, is also private sector, public sector really working much more closely together and not looking at the tactical aspect of how do you just get to the job. Transition is more than just getting a job. That's the tactical aspect of it. There's something deeper that happens, like the military, whether you spent, 4 years, 20 years, 30 years, you've been indoctrinated into an entire lifestyle, into an entire cognitive schema in your mind. And trying to undo that in 1 week or 2 weeks is like physically impossible. And so I would say that as you look at transition and speaking to others in the community, it's more than just a tactical aspect of how do you just get a job. It's getting into that mindset of preparing early, which is why I say transition starts early and way before you actually sign those papers to get your DD-214.
Great input. Thank you.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And I like to answer this in a two-part. Sorry, bear with me. So in terms of the ANHPI community, a lot of communities do not see military, as the general has mentioned, as the way forward. And parents, especially some of us who have come from countries where it's a one-child policy. As the only child, my parents were also reluctant, but I was able to convince them by really upselling the military, as my recruiter taught me so well. Some of that brainwashing in action and marketing, branding. Part of it is recognizing those who go into military are gaining leadership skills. And in addition to that, you're getting the GI Bill. And then there's health benefits the VA has so generously offered. And those who have gone into the military have worked in global, organizations, worked with foreign militaries, worked in logistics and STEM skills, particularly that are highly sought after by corporations. And so, in terms of how to communicate that to parents, I think the recruiters are doing a fantastic job. And you see the marketing out there, especially on I'm a little biased in Navy side, right? Which when I joined, it was global force for good. How do you dispute that, right? So part of it is communicating to parents where, the value of service really comes in a sense of belonging. You're part of America, and the more you want to assimilate, having that badge of honor, having the honor to serve, having the honor to actually bleed for your country is something that I think everybody will jump at. And that's something that the government offers, which corporate America cannot oftentimes, maybe with the exception of defense contractors who are also helping fulfill that mission. So the second part, I believe, in terms of veterans setting up for success. So in my current hat that I'm wearing here, I'm part of what we call the Charter Financial Analysts Program, which I'm part of the New York Society, where we have a Veterans Roundtable. And that society itself focuses on helping veterans transition into finance. In my day job, I'm over at Société Générale, which is a French bank. And there's a coalition of banking institutions that was basically started organizing back during the peak of Iraq and Afghanistan. And so as over 100,000 service members were getting out of the military with the withdrawal, these banks came and stepped up and started recruiting heavily for military talent, not because they have particularly technical skills, but because of the soft skills, the leadership skills that they gain in the military, and specifically the STEM areas, which our military is the most advanced, as you know, and the large budgets that contributes to specifically about $250,000 spent in training and educating our service members. And as they move up in rank, those are additional training which corporate America typically do not offer. And so you're recruiting from the talent pool that's often untapped. And so when you're in the banking sector, you're no longer the traditional banking world, right? Now there's digital assets, there's all transactions going through technology. Even some of the companies out there, which are leading sponsors of Veterans on Wall Street, which is an organization that focuses on helping veterans transition into finance, they call themselves tech companies. So, how do you tap into a talent pool that doesn't necessarily do a good job of marketing because the military itself wants to keep that talent pool? And so while I was at the Department of Defense at the Pentagon, we focus on keeping service members in the military. And so some of the programs that Lourdes has mentioned as well, right? These transition assistance program, which is 1 week long. They teach you how to file your paperwork, get your VA benefits, fill out your resume, work directly with Department of Labor to, get your resume ready and fill out application for apprenticeship programs. I like to say that our Department of Labor friends have been really fantastic in ensuring that service members are aware of these opportunities, and VA has done a fantastic job of ensuring they understand their benefits. But holistically, I think the burden is still on the government, right, to market those skill sets so that corporate America can help translate those particular skill sets if they're not in the defense industry world. And so, I would highly recommend more companies to get involved in helping understand those soft skills and creating training programs to really give them a leg up instead of a handout.
Yeah, and that's interesting you say that, because at Bristol Myers Squibb, we have an ERG, the veterans, so our Veteran Community Network Group, and our lead here, Pat Cook, is also. And what is great about that organization, that community, is that we we not only ensure that our veteran community has a place, right, has a place where they belong, has a place where they can go to, but even the program. So our veteran, our VCN, they partner with external and internal organizations to kind of bring that awareness, like you said, so that to give them, our hiring managers, those skills or those points where, hey, look, these veterans, they bring so much unique perspectives, so many skill sets to the organization, right? Let's use them. Let's hire them, and that's important. That awareness and that understanding, and our commitment at Bristol Myers Squibb to ensure that our veterans, military and military connected, are there. It's our focus, right? We're hiring more and more, and even just last year alone, we hired probably 350% more veterans, and 36% of them were minorities, and 14% are women. So our company is really making those efforts to ensure that we have a good pool of our veterans, and also that we're seeing them, we're giving them the tools that they need to succeed, not only in the community, but in leadership as well.
One alibi, I'm going to just to piggyback off of what she was saying, one alibi I will say is that there's a lot of different programs. It's not just at VA. There's the Skill Bridge program from DoD. There is also the mentorship programs that can be done virtually through Veterati and others. And then there's also the new one, which is the U.S. Digital Core Fellowship for software engineers, anything in cyber, that the government started just, I believe, last year for brand new grads. And so being aware and again, to Juan's point, marketing some of those different programs much more effectively to those who are transitioning is actually extremely important. The other thing that I'll say is that VA isn't just healthcare, it's also GI Bill, voc rehab. And so one thing that I will say from a transition standpoint, just because you're doing something in the military doesn't mean that that's what you need to be when you get out. Case in point, I'm in medicine. Right now, I am nowhere even close to medicine. And so there's this leap of faith that you sometimes have to take to get out of the whatever job that you had or career that you had in the military. If it doesn't fulfill you, don't do it. That is the fastest way to burn out. Don't do it. And I might touch on this later, but instead of passion, find a clarity of purpose for why you're here. That is always going to point you to true north.
And that's for everything. That's what I always tell my kids, right? Make sure you find something that your purpose and you're here, and they'll hire you based on your potential. You don't need to go in there with, look, this is what I graduated with, or this is what I went into, right? There's managers out there that will give you that fighting chance.
So we've talked a lot about industry, the private sector, but I also believe for veterans that, and particularly for the AAPI community, public service, whether it is appointments or elected office, and oftentimes we don't really think about that because in the 1 week of veterans transition, it's geared to employment as opposed to more strategically trying to find where veterans can contribute. And interestingly, maybe not so interestingly, you find that AAPI members of the military do not retain at the levels that others do. It's probably one of the lowest retaining group at the Air Force Academy, and I think I could say this at the other service academies. There's a huge cohort, substantial, much higher than the representation in the U.S. population of AAPIs. But when you follow the trajectory through the military, they attrit out. And I'm kind of curious for your take on that, because if there is a sense of there's not enough attention paid to AAPI military members, is that an issue for those who are hiring AAPI members as well? So anybody who wants to start with that.
So I'll start off with numbers. So as of last year, 2021, 8% roughly are Asian Americans enlisted. 6% are Asian Americans officer corps. And when you look at the federal service, Asian American Pacific Islanders are about 12%. and that's civil servants specifically at the Department of Defense. And so when you look at, so in terms of representation, AA and HPI are the fastest growing population in America. We're roughly inching on 7%. So, you look at those numbers, we're represented. However, to a certain extent, if you look at officer corps, 06 and above, that is a striking difference when 80% of those are white, Caucasian, male. And there is a cap for women staying in those, higher senior rank as well. And I think that's fundamentally a challenge, not only for the AA and HPI community, but across the Pentagon and DOD as a whole. And so they are working on addressing it. I just don't know if that is going to be anytime soon, because as you all probably are aware, you have to grow into those ranks. You can't just pluck someone and put them in as an officer, 06, there's your there's your 1-star. It doesn't work that way. And so this can take years. And part of that is ensuring that there is a robust talent management program in place so that as, 01s are placed in, they're not leaving after 4 years. As lucrative as it is, as investment banker friends and my colleagues in all these larger asset management corporations who are looking to poach from the military, it takes will and it takes a certain unique, selfless attitude to stay in this, sort of career that where everybody doesn't want you to be there, or to a certain extent, you're making sacrifices where your family are away from you, sacrifices where you're getting paid much lower than everyone else, and especially the defense contractor counterparts who are getting paid twice as much, if not sometimes 3 times as much. And so those are challenges that I think it's unique to DOD and to federal service. But at the same time, I think there are some opportunities here where whether it's this administration and the next administration can certainly, reconcile some of these challenges. And so I would say, hopeful to see Lourdes and a number of my friends still in the administration, doing all the hard work and really trying to make change. And so from that end, it's a legislative process, right? If the building doesn't want to do it, if the top wigs doesn't want to do it, if there is no will, even though everybody on the bottom says this must change, then it comes down to, I think, legislation. And I think that's part of the discussion, right? Hopefully it'll be a part of the conversation moving forward is what can Congress do to really help move these items along, right? I think it's taking many years. And I hope it doesn't take, several more decades to see these changes, because I have 2 kids and they are biracial and they do have the desire to serve. But as a mother, do I want them to go into an environment where they're not going to be welcome, where, at the highest level of educational attainment, they are still not treated equally, where from a fundamental economic perspective, yes, we got the GI Bill. Yes, I was able to leverage my GI Bill for 3 different degrees, including 2 masters. But at the same time, across the board, from a Department of Labor study, Asian Americans are the only demographics that has a lower economic outcome when compared to their non-veteran counterparts. And so, I think fundamentally, we need some legislative proposals and changes to help make this a reality, to see change moving forward.
I think when we talk about, and it's really great points, Juan, when we talk about public service, there's a lot of different types of public service. There's the federal government, that's the easy to see. But then there's also the local, right? You can make changes at the local level, whether it's a city, town, what have you. But I think more important than that, when we're trying and affect change, there has to be that, not just the will, but there has to be a fire that comes from within that person, because this is not an easy job. And I came from the enlisted corps, and being in senior executive now with the federal government is definitely a little different. And I will say that when you are going into any organization, whether government or anything else, you have to find that the community is reflected at least to who you are. Otherwise, it's really hard to not feel like you're the one sticking out like a sore thumb. Case in point, when I went when I was in school in Indiana, I was one of 3 people of color in the entire school, and so it's hard to not see that. So when you're talking about trying to get people to come into public service, one, we have to make sure that the community in public service actually reflects the people to feel like they're actually going to be part of that community. Now, whether that is in a strict permanent position, whether it is in contracting, but at least having that perception that there is a community around them that will reflect who they are. It's the same struggle that we have when we're talking about women in the military. The attrition rate, like women veterans are actually the fastest growing demographic within the veteran community. And there's several reasons for that we're not going to get into. But all I'm saying is that there's why women veterans will or will not go into VA facilities. Part of it is seeing themselves reflected in those communities where they feel welcome. And so I use that as an analogy to, if you want more Asian American ANHPI community members or veterans to actually go into public service, one, they have to see themselves reflected. Two, the type of people that you actually bring in there. One of the things I will say in full transparency, one of the things that got the government to convince me to join them, it was definitely, I never thought about ever going into government, by the way. I was in private sector at Airbnb, so I was perfectly happy there. But one of the reasons, and probably the main reason that they got me, was I looked at who they were hiring. They were hiring serious people that I respected their work in the veteran community. I saw people that were diverse. I saw people that I knew I've worked with before in different contexts, but still within the veteran community. And so when I saw who they were hiring, that is where it really kind of changed my mind, where let's see what we can do together. Because it's really hard to bang your head against the wall by yourself. But with a few other very purposeful people, it's a little bit easier to break that wall.
I like that, what you just said. And I smile because my older son, he graduated in engineering, and I wanted him to kind of follow my footsteps and go into pharmaceutical, right? But he's like, no, he works for the government. And he's like, no, I see the people, I like what they do. They're just inspiring. And I want to, like you say, community, I want to find more Filipinos or more Asian NHPI members or peers, and to kind of bring them along too, because we can really do something, right, in numbers.
Those are tremendous perspectives. And I think when I think about the AAPI community, and you were talking about growing up in Indiana, I can totally relate, because my brother, who looks like he's 100% Korean, and I used to run home from elementary school because we didn't look like everybody else. And that, I guess, was the thing, is just to chase people, and if you caught them, you pounded on them a little bit. Which oftentimes, more so now than before, because I don't think, as I came up in the military, nobody cared about Asians. They didn't really care that much about minorities, but Asians have always been an afterthought, because Asians have been considered to be self-sufficient. You do your own thing, and frankly, we haven't really had you mentioned congressional support. We haven't had the caucus support to illuminate some of the issues. And so during AAPI month, I found myself talking about my past and realizing how much I ran away from it. Nobody should ever be made to feel ashamed of their heritage. And yet that's precisely how I felt growing up. And that continued even in the military, just that desperation of trying to fit in. So number one, I think that we owe the community the dignity that it deserves for all members to feel like they are welcome wherever they go. And I still think, as much progress as our society has made, we've had a lot of setbacks over the last couple years, and the very quiet, self-sufficient Asian American community has sort of taken it in the face, literally and figuratively. So with that backdrop, that the resentment that I didn't realize was there, that is harbored by different communities, individuals, do you see that in your particular responsibilities, and how do you address that?
Start first.
So, yeah, well, for me, just a little bit of my personal story. I grew up in Connecticut, and I didn't, the whole model minority, right? You hardworking, successful. I didn't think that was a real issue growing up. And it wasn't until I graduated college, hit corporate America, where it was, being hardworking meant technical. So you're technically good at what you do. I ran my experiments and then I went home, right? Didn't have the opportunity to speak, when I had this data, didn't have the opportunity to speak in conferences, didn't have the opportunity to kind of share my learnings. It was you run your experiments and that was it. And even for when you think of success, it was, well, you're good. You don't need a promotion. You're content, right? You're fine. And so not really being able to just advance in my career was, and then I started to kind of fit in that mold. How people saw me in the workplace is how I started to be conformed and put in this box. And when I went home, I was totally one way: bold, assertive, loud, right? But then I came into work and it was just that heads down, do your work, don't complain, and then go home. And it really took a toll on me, actually. And it took a toll, and I needed change. I needed to, me personally, then I started advocating for myself. And it was really what drove me to become more the PAN lead, because I didn't want my children, the next generation, to feel like they are pigeonholed in this box, right? I wanted them to be comfortable and be able to bring their authentic selves forward in anything that they do, to break through that bamboo ceiling, right? We always talk about that bamboo ceiling, to break through and just to take up space and have a seat at the table. So that's just a personal story of mine. And with Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Month this month, Bristol Myers Squibb, our Pan-Asian network group, the theme is celebrating us. So last year we stepped up, we spoke up, and this year was just celebrating us, our accomplishments, our achievements, our resilience, our courage and strength, and just to continue to rise, right? That's really what is important to me, and I know many of our community.
Outstanding, thank you.
You mentioned a bamboo ceiling. Then there's the glass ceiling, and who knows what other ceilings there are that we still need to shatter. Yeah. But I think in my personal experience, at least when I was enlisted in the military, working overseas and domestically on military bases, I really felt that sense of hostility, what we're seeing here in America today. And I think that's because the military's, what we have, at least in the Navy, I don't know what the other branches have, core values that really sets the foundation for collaboration and taking care of its own. And so when you separate from the military, you're thrown into corporate America, where in some industries are, unfortunately much more hostile, much more, competitive. And so having these ERGs are really helpful in the sense that you're once again rebuilding that community and having people you can go to in forming those core values again, and understanding, the integrity, the, commitment to service, and how that could translate to corporate America. Because we at least in finance, have taken a toll since 2008, 2009. So with that said, bringing back that integrity is very important and crucial. And that's why having military veterans and especially military spouses as part of the community is important. And moving forward in terms of those employee resource groups, having spoken with many different corporations, we recognize that the veterans community, similar to the LGBTQ community, are extremely diverse, because when you look at ERGs, you're usually focusing on ethnic background. But when it comes to the veterans community, there are a lot of minorities and same thing with the LGBT community. And so how do you leverage that specific sort of mission to serve and to really have your employees give back and build out a collaborative environment so that you can all focus on the mission at hand, which is what we do very well when we're serving in the military. And so having that, focus, I think, has certainly expanded corporations' ideas about how to build out their DEIA strategy and incorporating veterans and military spouses into that. And I think, Lourdes, you can certainly, tell us more about your time at Airbnb and also how VA is collaborating with all these wonderful corporations.
Yeah, but before that, I definitely want to touch on some aspects that the general and others have talked about. So one part of the experience, I think, of AAPI in where you see some of these experiences transpire. One part you talked about, which is the that model minority, but then as a result of that, it kind of goes to one of the phenomena that actually happens with women veterans, which is feeling invisible. And so it's because there's not a huge spotlight that's put on you because you're doing well, then there must not be anything wrong. So there's a little bit of gaslighting. It's like, you're fine, so you don't need to go up anymore. So there's a little bit of gaslighting. There's an invisibility that either we put on ourselves because we don't want to be looked at as a troublemaker or making waves, or others put on us of like, you're fine, you've assimilated, so we don't need to do anything more. You have a job. And it's more than that. Like, when we talk about transition, it's more than just having a job. It is feeling fulfilled. Because we should not ever be living just to work. Work is just a tactic for us to live fully. And I think that's one aspect of transition that sometimes we forget. We're so wrapped up in the part of how do we get, the food on the table, the roof over our head, that we forget all of these other things that happen. But as you were talking about some of these negative experiences that happen, I think that where I saw it the most was actually when I was in the military first getting into the military, trying to assimilate so much that I was losing my own identity. I was trying not to it was a little bit antithetical to my own character, which trying not to make waves. But then I was doing it so much that I was losing my own identity. And I think there's a part that we have to remember, that trying to assimilate doesn't mean losing our own culture, losing our identity of where we came from, because that is honestly where our strength comes from, that difference in perspective. I like to use this analogy when I'm doing mentorship, which is having that difference of perspective. Like when we're looking at a chair, like what do we use it for, right? To sit on. We've got different chairs. But what else can we use it for? A table, a weapon. We can use it for various other things. We can use it as shelter if something's raining. But it's that ability to think differently because of our diverse experiences that makes us think differently about that one chair that's in front of us. The chair is more than a chair, but it depends on how you look at it. And that difference of perspective comes from our experiences. And sometimes one of the things that we do, which is trying to assimilate so much to not make waves, is what makes our own experiences, especially is trying to fit ourselves in that model minority figure so that no one else kind of like shines a light on us thinking that we're a troublemaker trying to get up further in our careers. There is that balance that we strike as we're growing into our own. But I would say that as we each grow into ourselves, into our next stages in career, we have to start looking at it much further than what is it that we have to do, but how do we pave the way forward for others?
So the title of the panel, Veterans Leading the Way, when you listen to the three of you talking, it really is about leadership, and it's about the lessons that the people have learned along the way, whether it's in the military or out of the military. And I think for the AAPI community, the diversity of experiences and you know, I tie it back to the diversity of the military point that you had made. I think postures those coming out of the military very well because they have they've gotten accustomed to an environment that is diverse. They've been in an environment that that has treated them differently, but sometimes, fortunately, the same. And I think being able to take that to wherever they go next is a strength because, not to mention the things that they're exposed to in terms of deployments and different assignments, and it must be the act of God telling me it's time to wrap it up. But I think that all those experiences are very powerful for posturing the veterans, all veterans, but in particular AAPI. And you know, despite the backdrop of that model minority or the silent minority or the last couple years of blowback, and even I'll throw out there the debate as to whether Asians are a minority when it comes time to college admissions and things like that. There is that tenacity, as my mother used to talk about, grit and determination. And despite the barriers that are presented, you just figure out your way to power through them. And the support structure, and I'll do a shout out for those who have ERGs. 10 years ago, we really didn't have ERGs. And now actually having ERGs where you have people feel comfortable, it indicates that the company values the diversity of its employee base, but also it provides a forum for individuals to come together and cross-check on things and talk about things and shape the culture of the organizations that they're associated with, talk about current issues, et cetera. And so I'm very pleased to hear about veteran and AAPI ERGs along with the many others, the LGBT, et cetera, because those are ways to empower individuals. And even in the military now, they're setting up these affinity, I don't know that they're calling them ERGs, but affinity groups, trying to get after the issue, which for those who were in the military, you can probably relate to the fact that it was hard to find anybody who looked like you. And so now, thankfully, in this hyper-connected society that we have, the ability to do that using any kind of medium is fantastic because people do not feel so alone. And in the end, I think that that's what it's all about. It's about individuals feeling like they have that connection, knowing that they have that connection, and employers of any kind, whether it happens to be public service or it happens to be the private sector, being there to understand what the AAPI community as veterans bring when they know that AAPI as veterans is not the doctor and the lawyer aspect of things, but it is the honorable calling of individuals who sought to serve and now are looking to take their experiences and leverage them for goodness for American society and the world in general. So I know we started late, but still it's just a little past 3:15, but I wanted to offer any final comments or thoughts that you might have for those who will be listening to the panel and the sage perspectives that you're offering.
To go first? Well, I do have to say that I'm in awe to be on the panel with such strong Asian American warriors, right? And everything that you have done for our country, to protect our country, to put yourselves out there for freedom is just simply amazing. And I must say, I was quite nervous in the beginning. I didn't know what to expect, but I really had a great time here. And I was taking note because, as I said, Pat, our VCN, we need to partner up more, right? We talk about the intersectionality and the Asian AA and HPI community and veterans, and how can we do more to kind of get their voices out there to make sure that they feel comfortable. So that is my takeaway from this conversation.
And that's exactly similar to my takeaway as well. We recently at Societe Generale hosted a panel between the Asian Professional Network and our Veterans Network, which I'm the co-chair for the Veterans Recruitment Committee. And we were fortunate enough to bring our mutual friend, Dr. Kamal Kazi, to speak. And he's not only a renowned doctor, but he's also on the White House's Asian American Racial Justice Council. So, commission technically. So he's the deputy commissioner and is leading on the forefront recommendations and how we can really build out the Asian community within the military. And there is actually a Marine ERG. The Marines are the only ones who have it. I don't know why. So hoorah to the Marines leading the way. And I think fundamentally what I hope to see is more of these collaborations, and we are doing it in corporate America. Many banks are fostering these connections and being able to branch out and reach out to, really, in the February, right? We did an event with the Air Force superintendent with the Black network. And so we just did one with API, and in June we'll do one for LGBT and, so on and so forth. But I think fundamentally it's finding ways to really explain the commonalities and the collaboration and, continue putting forth mission. I think that's where corporate America really gains its value from hiring veterans. And then fundamentally, it's also, there are also corporate tax credits. And not to mention defense contractors who've really just outshined everybody else, every other industry. They are publicly listed companies. And so they are under the SEC in terms of promoting diversity on boards, and they have the sentiments of the consumers, and so they are doing more in that capacity. So it's great to see these corporations doing, wonderful things to incorporate all these ERGs. But at the same time, it's also understanding that there is also Department of Labor regulation that would require defense contractors, right, and other subcontractors working with the federal government to also hire these populations. And I think benchmark is about 5.3%. So defense contractors are roughly 20 to 30%. I think the rest of the industry, especially in finance and marketing and some of the other subcontractors to the federal government, needs to do a better job. So I will end there. Thank you.
I think one of the things that I really took away from this is really about intersectionality. So where I sit as the director for the Center for Women Veterans at VA, the lens that I look at through through all of the issues is on women veterans. And women veterans are actually in every issue and also in every race. And so as I look at and as we look at a lot of these different issues and sectors, I have to make sure that I always keep in mind that it's not just about one dimension of a person, because every person is more than just that one dimension. You're not just a gender, you're not just a sexuality, you're not just a race. There's your roles, especially when we're talking about AAPI, we have particular cultural roles based on our gender. And so those are the different nuances that when you think about how do we hire for X industry, for this type of sector, for this type of job, think about not just a person from one perspective as the technical competence, because that person, whatever their experience is, whether it's in their life, everyone has some amazing, amazing experiences in their life. That did not come from their job. That came from their experiences. So when you look at how do we do more for our veterans, especially our AAPI, look beyond the technical competence, because that's what's going to show where their potential is.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists as well as our audience for the discussion today. And, in particular for just this group in terms of your leadership, your commitment to advancing the AAPI community and our society as a whole. So thank you and safe travels to everybody.